record this session so that we have it as a resource following this and can make it a little bit easier so that we can be more engaged. I love to take notes and I will do that anyway. But I would also like the ability to come back and reference this as needed.
If
Yeah,
we're
we
going
really
to
appreciate that.
I just texted Jean too. I think she was planning to be here as well, so hopefully we'll get her as well. Well, you know, I'll start and pass it off to Kathy pretty quickly, but one, just wanted to really celebrate the strength of the quality of life section, and like a lot of critical issues are named there, and also the beautiful possibilities of what can be. And so want to center around our conversations first around what we love about that and how that can shape the whole plan, because right now, I think I'll turn it over to Kathy, but there's a concern that many of us share that, well, I think, and I haven't talked directly with Mo about stuff, but I don't know who the Eric guest is. But I think everyone else has shared the excitement about that section and a concern that the overall plan, if you just looked at it, like at the top, you wouldn't know that this plan was coming out of the middle of a 2-year pandemic, time of intense disruptive change that calls on us to do a lot of deep reflection about how we got to this moment of collective precarity and exaggerated racial, social, ecological injustice, and how we can use this plan to heal past harm and to create and regenerate social and ecological well-being. And the quality of life gets at that. But I want to kind of turn it over to Kathy as our neighbor who's lived here the longest. Yeah, so take it away, Kathy.
Yeah, I really appreciate Eugene allowing us to be able to have this forum to direct how we want to share the content and concerns and issues and things that we appreciate about the plan with you, and so that it becomes more of a resident driven sort of time to share those points with you instead of going through the plan step by step, because we've gone through a lot of that plan very much step by step. And I would just echo again what Elizabeth was saying, is that the plan, the way it started, is out of sync. I mean, we really see the quality of life as the first component that should be addressed, especially when we're dealing with neighborhoods that have a disparate impact and historical redlining, historical inequities that have been from day one practically. And we really can only reconcile that and only repair that if we really look at it from a quality of life lens, and not as a handbook for developers on how to go about developing and getting the most out of every parcel to make the biggest buck and the highest revenue for the city. So I think that is our biggest concern, is that we really want to see this part of it drive the rest of the plan and drive the way that it focuses on the inequities. And you have in here embedded, which is interesting, different equity indexes. And I think that really helps lay the groundwork when you're looking at the quality of life, and we're all in the worst equity index in regards to parkland and everything. So that begins to sort of frame really the inequity issue for these neighborhoods that have had these issues, and then move on to perhaps more of a mobility and connection as it relates to how we are moving around within these neighborhoods, and then address what you have blaringly posted in the map early on about the high vulnerability of displacement of residents in these neighborhoods. And if that's not interwoven into this story, about the quality of life, then we're really missing an opportunity, and especially as it relates to housing and economic vitality. So I'm very concerned that we don't have that theme carried out about how quality of life will need to improve to enhance our housing and not to displace residents, but to strengthen the community and not be a corridor for apartment dwellers and renters without a community. And we've got the themes and the quality of life where we talk about the culture, the natural capital, the human capital, the social capital, and economic capital. And then there's sections of it that have the food area, which would really see some connections and where we have economic vitality. I'm thinking of particularly of the 7th and Sheridan area, which really needs to be changed from what we have in the land use if we're looking at over 12 stories, and yet the quality of life has this sort of like we need to connect with the gulches, we need to use those assets and build those parks. So I think that both can be done where you improve that area and make it that a food area. I don't know if it's equivalent to the eco district of Sun Valley, but maybe a food district of one of the neighborhoods that keeps on expanding on building the Sheridan area as a way to enhance that and enhance the park area and quality of life. So I can see that as being a natural connection. And then finally looking at more of the land use as a way, as a byproduct of how we get there. And I think what concerns me most on the land use is that we have maximum heights that seem to indicate upzoning would be in the future. And I think we need to clarify that. And I think we've missed an opportunity where in the individual neighborhood plans, we're not carrying over some of those themes that were already identified as opportunities earlier on in the different sections, and it would be good to continue that thread as you're talking to highlight those different neighborhoods. I was kind of shocked to see how small the Villa Park section was, and I'll just speak for my own personal local and immediate, that section seems to not even reflect some of the things that you were even talking about earlier in the quality of life and enhancing the park and dealing with health equity and those type of areas that could really be elaborated on. So I think one of the things that really came to me is that we had some conflicts on the one hand with sun maps that conflicted with other areas of the plan. So I think there needs to be some cross referencing that makes sure that we're connecting those dots, because it does seem like there's a disconnect in a lot of those areas. So those are the things that are coming up for me that I'd like to see address in this plan to pull it together stronger, to continue to keep on building on the quality of life and seeing how all those other areas interconnect with it. So I'll go ahead and pass to someone else. Heidi or Jaime?
Jaime will. Yeah, I just want to thank these first two comments because they really tie together. What I just wanted to say before we start looking at things is that something that I struggled with is really understanding what we're able to do with designing incentives within this plan. Like, where do they, like, how do I see them in plain sight? And then what can we inform with this, or how, or we want to, I mean, I guess we need to understand how we can design incentives for affordable housing or even for preservation of areas, and just, or is it even possible, right? I think that was something I struggled with, and I was struggling hard to find in the plan, like, where do those exist? Like, where can I go find that? I think that the way we're using our land and caring for it is has been something that's like a recurring theme, and particularly like with the act, like our food access, like knowing that there's funds to help us know if our ground is viable to just, like, you know, it's good dirt and not contaminated, you know, those type of things being like the areas that we're in, because we have a dump in our neighborhood, an old dump, right? So there's a lot of that's why I mentioned that, and I'm sure that exists in more in the Valverde areas, maybe some Sun Valley. And then speaking of those two, like a recurring theme among us is that's happening is the way that we talk about reconnecting, revitalizing, and using the Platte River as relief, because these are the places that are almost taken advantage of in the past, and now that they're kind of putting where people live and where industry lives, like into this predicament that we can give back. And then the question is, can we use this plan to give, like, I keep saying give the land back to the land, and I mean that in that way, that like letting it be this what it's there for, right? Like our parks are our safe spaces that we can convene and be. This is a part of that, but it's a little bit differently to be treated. So really about that reconnection, revitalization, that relief for us as people to have those areas into this plan. So that's why I want to stop, because everybody else said everything else so well. I just wanted to make sure we think about that as we review. And I'll pass it to Jean. Welcome. Hi, Jean. Or Heidi, if she's ready.
Hi, I've started putting in, and so I agree with what everybody's saying because we've been talking about it for quite a while. And so I've been started putting in some suggestions to the Sun Valley area. And some of it is adding in more of the recommendations. But I think there's two areas for me that are almost like deal breakers at this point. And one of which is that whole industrial area, and really trying to look at beefing up some policy and substantive recommendations, more than just convening a committee. We've been at this for 2 years. That was the first recommendation when you said, everybody took our temperature when we were, at the first meeting. That was one of my recommendations, is to deal with that. And so I just think that if we needed to have had this meeting, in order to include them in the recommendations, we should have. But it's not enough at this point to publish a document that just says, oh, we'll deal with it later, and convene a committee. Because it also goes to my other area, which is a deal breaker for me, which is when I look at the map for zoning, and I think Kathy mentioned it as upzoning. I am so concerned about how the stadium district is depicted as a plus 21. It's kind of all grayed out and just shows plus 21, that really concerns me, because from past experience with the Decatur Federal Station Area Plan and having tried to deal with the rezone in that whatever that is that creates an entitlement that the zoning board, the planning board says our hands are tied. We can't do anything about that. If somebody comes in and wants it, we have to give it to them. So maybe I have a wrong misunderstanding, but that was my experience with the DHA campus rezone. And we were just told flat out that that had been in the Decatur Federal Station Area Plan as allowed, and so if the owner wants it, they can have it. So I think it would not only, I guess one of my biggest concerns is that not that the planning board necessarily will allow every developer to come in at 21 stories, but that it seriously undermines our ability to negotiate a community benefits agreement. Zoning is our only window for that. So I don't know how you deal with that, but that's a huge, huge concern for me. And if you have any kind of insight as to what that means, but I just know that when we had the Decatur, when we went on the rezone for the DHA campus, we had virtually, I mean, the planning board just said our hands are tied, they're entitled to it, essentially. So those are probably my two biggest areas that I'm feeling pretty passionate about right now. But, you know, certainly there's, you know, I think others, and I think, as I told you, I really, you know, it's a very thoughtful, and I think, you know, it's a great effort and start to what we've been talking about.
Heidi, do you want to jump in?
Yes. Hello. Yeah, I just want to, yeah, I think just overall, you know, obviously it shows a ton of effort, and the quality of life section, as mentioned before, is, I mean, that feels like the section that really reflects most of what we've been communicating and talking about for 2 years, and really trying to look at our neighborhoods in more of, you know, with systems thinking, because we know from what we've seen, you know, for people who have been around for the sort of the Blueprint Denver rollout in the past 10 years, we have not, you know, we allowed for density, and density didn't serve us. You know, in fact, it resulted in a lot of what we were seeing with unaffordability, gentrification, land use, just not. So when I look at this plan and I see the map on page 33, this just says to me, you know, Blueprint 2.0. And so I don't think that without systems thinking and without having our quality of life section flipping this narrative from a reductive to a regenerative plan, that there, without that leading, that we're not going to be able to get where we all are saying that we want to go. And I think that that, you know, for example, like, you know, not only just the stadium, but if you look at the Clover, you look all along the river, and you look at the maps that are in the back, you know, you have to get to page like 154, I think, before you get to maps around water quality basins, around tree canopies, around heat islands, and all of the areas that are identified in those maps are also the areas on map 33, the opportunity areas for development to come in and to do what they've been doing without having any information other than you can build to this height and you can build to this density. And so I just I love the way that, you know, the neighborhoods have been working together. And I think that, you know, having all of us grouped together, we were grouped together for a reason, because we all thrive and survive together. And everything that happens in the river doesn't start in the river. It starts, you know, starts in the mountains, but let's just call it Sheridan for now, like that moves through, you know, all of these waterways and all of these basins. Those are the things that need to be informing what we're doing in our neighborhoods. Those are the things that are going to provide resiliency and equity. And, you know, the land back to the land is not, that is so vital to us being able to survive climate disruption, to be able to support ourselves and to support each other, to feed each other. A lot of things around quality of life they can't be derived from density. They can't be derived from height. You can't relate those two. They don't answer the questions of, you know, what are we doing with cars? What are we doing with how we move around? How are our kids walking to school safely? How are people able to have that quality of life is an economic benefit, and it is the driver, and it has to be the driver in our neighborhoods. And I think that if we can start talking about a system change with that quality of life first drive, and that drives, just like Kathy said, all through all of this, then we've got something that we can work with, that we can refer back to, that we can have to actually get us where we want to go. But yeah, I think yeah, it's a lot of work. Thank you.
And thanks, Heidi, for really making that connection around that the areas that are most vulnerable to displacement from a housing perspective are also the areas that are most impacted by climate change, with the heat islands, with the even the flood. There's a lot of investment coming in to address those problems. Really grateful that CASR, the Climate Action Sustainability and Resilience Office, that I didn't see mentioned in the plan, that office is working directly with Nest neighborhoods first, and have approached all of us on this call to work on looking at how to be addressing those two, the ecological and the social crises together. So that's key. And I think that there's, like, as we keep iterating, the quality of life section is super strong in naming how those intersect in many different ways. I think the ordering Kathy named, the reordering allows the strengths that are already built into the plan to be readjusted as a matter of like nested scales. I also want to see if we can, well, one, I sent some documents that Jorge Figueroa had shared as an individual, wearing his individual person hat, from his past work with working on the River Sisters project. But we haven't, all of us have been talking for years about how we could better incorporate River Sister concepts into the plan. That are really rooted in Indigenous traditions. And I think it would be awesome if our quality of life plan directly had a highlight, that case study pullout of what's already been started, and recommended adopting that as a framework for governance of the care of our land, and the land back to the land for the support of all beings that Jaime was really bringing forth. And then, like, from the quality of life, as we adjust that, we can also then have the transformative projects bit get really clear about what transformative means. Like, it's implied there, but I think some clear language would be helpful, that also names that the West area neighborhoods, like other neighborhoods all across Denver, that it's been site to many transformations over time. And the most significant transformation that happened around between 1860 and 1890, when the area was, through processes of genocide and ecocide, taken over with a pattern of settler colonialism and an economic growth model based on relationships of extraction, exploitation, and exclusion. And fast forward many, many years, and we are experiencing the collective net impact of what happens when you develop in that way. We have major climate change issues. We had incredible health disparities related to both. And so, like, when we speak of transformation now, we're speaking of repair and healing and regeneration. And that page, there's my page number, can't see it, but there's the equity and community capitals for collective health and wealth. Those could be translated into key performance indicators, and those key performance indicators could reflect the standards that we want to see development lead to, and how we will evaluate the effectiveness of the transformative projects that we attempt to bring forward, that we will be looking to see how they shape those diverse capitals to really support intergenerational community-rooted health and wealth. And then related, I'm gonna just wear the Avon hat for a second. And just, I think we all know how deeply concerned
We're
she
losing.
was reading the plan and the plan for Valverde, the whole, and that the burdens that come with industry would once again be situated there. There's some good general language around hinting at, oh, it could be awesome. And like, frankly, like before redlining, like Valverde benefited from having walkable jobs. There was industry and like immigrants and people, working class families lived and walked to their jobs, and that was great, except that the jobs, other than the celery farms, like a lot of the jobs were jobs in industries that were having really intense impacts for the river's health, for all of the beings living over there too. And so we know that there are models of circular economy, industrial ecology. I sent the example of the Method soap factory and
Elizabeth, you're freezing up, at least on mine.
I think we're losing her.
Well, maybe while we see if her signal comes back. I was going to see if Mo or Sean wanted to share.
I'm just going to type a message
there.
to Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, I don't know if you can hear us, but you are breaking up a bit. So if it's okay.
I could, and I just chatted to say, yeah, Mo, if you want to carry forward, and but I'll type a little bit more. But performance zoning may be a strategy for the industrial areas.
No, thank you so much, and especially speaking for Yvonne, knowing that she's not here and has been in that space with all of you to talk about the plan. I think, again, I will defer to this group. I imagine you've kind of made a plan for how you want to use this time, and I want to respect that. I think the references, because you've all probably been looking together at the plan, you may know what sections you're referencing, but the page numbers have been really helpful when you mention those. And I imagine for Eugene and Val, right, to look at where we can tangibly be making some of these changes that might be helpful. So I appreciate that. And I just, again, I put it in the chat, but just appreciate all the time that this group has spent together. And I feel like every invitation I've gotten, I have not been able to join. So again, I want to defer to the group to use this space. And I want to thank Eugene and Val again for kind of creating this time to come together. So I have thoughts, but not at such a high level as this group. And so I appreciate that. And I'm following along. So thank you. And I also am not as familiar. It sounds like, I know, Elizabeth, this is like your PhD, your job, and you and Yvonne have connected in a way on Valverde that, with history that I've read lightly on, but really respect your knowledge of our history and how that can be, I think, recognized. And I'd love to connect with you and Yvonne possibly, and maybe chat more closely about Valverde specifically, if you have the time, because that's more to ask. So thank you.
I'll make the time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Miss you.
And Adriana as well. Yes. Bye-bye. Or not bye-bye. I'm still here.
All right, Sean.
Yeah, I just to tell you the truth, I like the plan, and I wasn't dragged in kicking and screaming, but I agree with a lot of the thoughts, and I kind of listened to the background to a lot of the ideas, especially Kathy and Elizabeth and Yvonne about I'm kind of in the neighborhood. I've been here 8 years, And I don't know the area very well, but it's been schooled with and stuff. And I guess the two main things I think about is, well, the one thing I think about is, in a way, like if you have a company and you treat your employees really good, they'll treat the customers really good. So in a way, maybe the plan will work out the same with a focus on the way it is right now versus kind of a focus on quality of life and then kind of add everything afterwards. So I think it might come up with kind of a similar results. I mean, I don't want to bias everybody, maybe everybody disagrees, but maybe it's just kind of a slight tweak and make the focus be quality of life, but maybe we'll get similar results. But I also really like Gene's idea about if we give everything that the developers can use, and they already have the height limit, they don't have to come back to us for anything. So we have no bargaining chip at all. So by having a bargaining chip, especially the neighborhood, a lot of neighborhoods around here, you all know the history. They've been screwed with. They've had some damaging industries and highways put in. The way to empower those people is to give them choices and to give them power, to give them decision-making abilities with like developers and stuff. So in a way, I like the plan as is, but I really like the focus of this group about trying to reverse some of the bad things in the past. I think the way to reverse that is to give some power back to the community with some of these ideas here. So I just think maybe it's not a huge shift, but maybe a small shift. In a way, it'd be a big shift, but in a way, it might come up with similar results. I mean, I myself, and I don't know about this group, but I agree with a lot of stuff in the plan. I probably agree with more than everyone else because I'm more, focused. I'm more developer friendly, I guess we could say. But I really like the way this group is thinking it through.
Thank you for that, Sean. Mo, you have your hand, and then I know Jillian and Eric are also here, and they've joined us over the last year and a half almost, really, in my mind, as a voice for those that they work with who are, sort of more traditional workers and worker needs. And so I'd be open to hearing their thoughts as well. So Mo, and then I see Eric, your hand, so we'll go in that order.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to chime in again because I didn't really address like my thoughts on the plan. And again, in reading it, I do agree with Sean. I think I was really impressed with how it kicks off and addresses equity. And at the same time, though, I think, again, I wasn't reading it with as critical an eye of some folks in this group. And I really value that because I think about how the plan is going to be used. And I imagine a lot of people in this group will be using it as a tool to make change. And I think that's kind of there are different needs there than maybe the general reader or the general neighbor who might reference this for maybe a different purpose, more informative, as opposed to, what it really is meant for is to actually guide decision-making and policy and change. And so I just wanted to say that I am really happy with the work, and from the perspective of someone who hasn't pulled up a seat yet in kind of the space of discussing with maybe a more critical lens. So I don't mean to sound ungrateful for all of the time and effort that has gone in here, and I also don't mean to sound complacent. So just wanted to mention that and how I'm excited to put it to use. And it sounds like there are some more specific changes that we can make to actually, benefit us when we are trying to work with industry and developers and all those interests that we need to navigate as neighbors and try to maintain power and build our voice. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Eric, thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here. So if folks don't know, my name is Eric Leverage. I'm a researcher with Colorado Jobs with Justice. We did a survey collection project at the end of last year in West Denver, collected 530 surveys, and my colleague Jillian is also doing a lot of one-on-one meetings with members of the community, talking about the plan, but also sort of what the future of the area can look like. I think I agree in general terms with a lot of the things that have been said. I appreciate the sort of historical and structural framework that people are advocating for. I left a note in the online doc on the 1925 zoning code, which is presented in a kind of neutral way, and it was much more insidious than that. So I really appreciate that folks are taking that that stance and that sort of approach to the work. I focus really on, you know, I know that there's a lot of experts on things like mobility and things like that. I focused on the housing section and the sort of economic issues that come up throughout the report. On housing, you know, I think it's a difficult, as folks have said, it's really vital that we don't upzone the neighborhood out of recognition, and that we're really deliberate about how we're addressing any affordability issues. I will hand it to the drafters that, you know, an emphasis on community land trusts, tenant co-ops, things like that, really great, and really a really helpful way to try to build that sort of permanent affordability in a community driven way. My big red flag on housing, and it's similar to what Jean and other folks have said, we need to be clear that to the extent that there is going to be an emphasis on multifamily development, when just talking about low-income housing is not enough. We need to be clear with numbers about AMI. Roughly speaking, given the numbers in the report, we're looking at we need affordability at 60% AMI and below. I think it's really important to be specific about that for a number of reasons. A, that's what the need is in the community. But B, it will get that if it is only says low income housing, that will turn into 80 to 20%. It will turn into workforce housing, which will only drive gentrification and displacement more. So I think it's really vital to have that those specific numbers from a policy perspective, so that you know, we're not set up to have developers try to go around those recommendations, right? So that's the big thing for me on housing, but I do appreciate a lot of the creative strategies that came out of it. I worked on a statewide legislative affordable housing task force last year, and these ideas are honestly much more comprehensive, so I appreciate that. On the economics, so really a lot of my general feedback is when we're talking about business incentives, either in the economic vitality section, or really good example is the recruitment of grocery stores to address the issue of food deserts. Great, wonderful. I really think it's vital that those be high road employers that are paying their workers well, and having a community driven sense of how they fit into the local economy, and making sure, just to make sure that that economic benefit is spread throughout the community. Similarly, I think when we're talking about these big transformative projects and so forth, really need to think about living wage requirements, local hire requirements, so that we're giving more economic opportunities to the workers that are already in the neighborhood, as well as opportunities for apprenticeships and other career development opportunities through those different developments. The last, and I have several other things in the document. My last sort of broad point, based on, you know, especially our survey engagement with folks, is like we had, you know, 530 surveys, mostly lower income folks, and the majority of folks wanted to hear about the plan. They wanted to attend a meeting. And so we know that folks want to have their voice heard. And so I just want there to be a little bit more thought and a little bit more specificity, because throughout the document, it's, you know, community desired X, and what does that look like? What is engagement going to look like moving forward, both through registered, you know, the RNOs and things like that, but also less official structures, to make sure that everyone has the chance to engage as we're moving forward. Because as folks know, it's the character and the communities of the neighborhood really deserve that. So, I think that just about does it. So
thank you. That was very thoughtful. I really appreciate that. So, Jillian, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add, or if Eric is covering sort of the Colorado Jobs with Justice angle. If you want to add anything, since we haven't heard from you yet, then we can go and circle back. I think Kathy has her hand up, and then Mo, your hand is up again. So would love to go in that order. But Jillian, anything you'd like to add before we go to Kathy?
No, Eric covered most of the things that we just discussed were the our primary goals for the plan, but he did leave a lot of additional notes that I think are just as valuable. So when you guys get a chance and are looking through the plan, taking those into consideration as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So Kathy, then Mo, then Heidi.
Yeah, just as people were talking and bringing up different points, I did want to circle back on some of those things that were highlighted, especially when you were talking about that missing industrial piece where we really have just very small glares on, Valverde about having that transition from the industrial to neighborhood. I mean, that to me is a neighborhood that is split in two. We have two different neighborhoods in Valverde split by an industrial area wedged between the middle, and there's no way to connect the two. And I can see certainly that is another way of enhancing housing development along the mixed use of industrial, as well as being able to have a place for people to work. And I think what we don't see is what is really the data showing us is that people that are in the industrial businesses are not hiring locally to have folks. They'd be able to have access to good jobs as well as being able to have opportunities for housing, so they are closely connecting to the area where they work. And that split of the mobility where the industrial just sort of takes away from the connection of East Valverde and West Valverde, so that you also see that as the highest sort of heat island area, the highest area where there is impermeable surfaces, where there's so much cement that it really needs to have that connection of mobility to be able to drive that more into a green space area that connects the two area and keeps on building on the potential for additional housing interwoven within that. And I think that was a real missed opportunity that I like to see us revisited. And the same thing is really true with also with Sun Valley. You just have a split with that, where you don't have any of that transitioning happening with that industrial area. I think what concerns me most about the housing when we're talking about multiple units housing and we're talking about low moderate income housing is that we're having a tendency to have a segregation of economics in neighborhoods that are still prevailing where people live. And I think that's something we really need to be watching out for, to where we're not building generational wealth. We're just segregating economics of your income to live in certain neighborhoods. I mean, it was certainly highlighted even in the recent Denver Post article about the housing affordability initiative that the city is looking at, where we don't have ability to have a parity in different neighborhoods because the zoning doesn't even allow multi-unit housing of 10 units or more, to where you would even have a mix of housing types. But instead we have segregation of housing and economics in West Denver. And we're taking the brunt of that hit of being the multi-unit low income neighborhood and perpetuating that into the future. And unfortunately, I think this plan is sort of reinforcing that. And I'd like to see us revisit that as well, so that we do have a mix of social capital and economics, ability and opportunities and generational wealth of people that live here to be able to stay here. So you talk about the community trusts and co-op housing and co-housing, and you also talk about in the tools that you have at your disposal, design overlays and neighborhood conservation overlays, but they aren't carried over into areas where we could use them. And I'd like to see those elevated as a way to get to there, so that we are preserving naturally occurring affordable housing that we have in these neighborhoods, instead of just all referring it to the missing middle. So I would like to sort of have that discussion change to where maybe there's a neighborhood conservation overlay where we have a lot of identified missing middle area in the land use section that you have within this plan itself. So I think there's a lot we can work with to continue to elevate what the transformative projects are beyond just what the city sees as their transformative projects. I think we've identified some of them and they need to be fleshed out more. I appreciate that you included putting a park across 6th Avenue. And we have the discussion about the impact of 6th Avenue Highway and I-25 within it, but we really don't even see it addressing the type of streets that we have, the type of impact that it does for these neighborhoods as a way to, again, build on that green space adjacent to those areas or provide a park space that goes across those areas. It seems like we sort of throw up our hands and say, well, that's CDOT and we can't touch it. And I don't think that's the case because we're certainly doing a lot of touching, a lot of feeling with Colfax, and we're talking about federal and Sheridan having BRTs, but we also need to see that it's the highest incident of traffic accidents and kills as referred to, so that we need to also look at the safety measure on how we can sort of create some calming or a way so that people can navigate across those busy barriers that they have become in our neighborhoods. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it along to the other folks.
All right, so I think, I'm not sure which order it was, but Heidi and Elizabeth. And then as we get close to the top of the hour, and I've been taking some notes in addition to, of course, this being recorded. There are a few things I would like to just sort of address and make sure that I'm understanding the feedback. And there could be some opportunities for some additional clarifications on what the plan can and can't do, or what it is suggesting and what it's not suggesting. So I just want to, there's a few things I just want to make sure that we are on the same page with this feedback. But before we get to that, I do want to hear from Heidi and Elizabeth.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and I mean, just to sort of, I mean, I'm imagining many more conversations, and this kind of systems thinking is, can't be resolved in reverse everything that's happened in the past in 2 hours, unfortunately. But I want to thank Kathy, because that's she led nicely into kind of what I was thinking around mentioning these overlays. And while I think that community benefits agreements are great tools, I think that that it shouldn't be the tool that the community is put in a position to where, on page 33 in the beginning of the document, we give everything to the developer, and then we're in a position of negotiating and begging for it back if we have the opportunity to do that. And that maybe with some kind of ecology overlay, that we can, that what we're attempting to do with that is to put, so the community has what it needs and what it wants forefront, so that we are attracting things, food solutions and providers, like in a plan that is people and earth centric, with an ecology overlay. Like, I don't know if we're necessarily attracting or wanting to attract, a King Soopers type, solution to food availability and providing for ourselves and for our communities, but making space for the food to come from where we are, and to be distributed along these networks that we talk about in the mobility section, and really making sure that we're attracting developers who want to be in relationship with community. And I think in an ecology type overlay, or in the thinking that whether it's that or whatever it is that the ecology happens, we plan for the water and we plan for the people, and we plan for that first, and everything else is layered on top. And I know we've had these conversations before where what we tend to do is we take our land and we make space for the developer and the car, and then the trees and the people, they get shoved in with whatever's left. And when I see things like, when I look at the clover and that vast resource that we have that is a floodplain, we've got our most valuable resource moving through it, and and the first, you know, and this is where, you know, a high capacity transit center, and to a developer that's like, good, you know, fill it in, and then we'll just, you know, maybe we'll do a dry creek here or there. But instead of reversing that with what I think we're talking about, which is planning for that water first. It's not just a component of all the other things. It doesn't have, it's not in a level playing field. It is the field. So how do we do that so that that is informing, so that now that we've got that, you know, any developer that's like, you know, oh, good, like it looks like we can just, I can build a square, you know, like we're attracting people, you know, that can build with round edges, and to be in relationship with community, and to come in and be like, this is a 50-year investment. It's not a 5-year investment, where, you know, I'm not really building housing. I'm building, you know, a physical manifestation of a spreadsheet for people who don't even live here, maybe have never even been here. They're not looking to fill the units. They're looking to increase rents, to extract and sell and make their 10 million and rinse and repeat. And that's the plans that we, you know, we as, you know, all over this country and this planet to some extent, that's how we've been doing, and we're trying to extract results from it that we're just there, that are not going to be able to be there. So I just want, you know, with the tools that we're coming up with, I just like really need to emphasize that ecology with earth and people first. And also I really liked what Eric was saying about engaging community, because I think that this systems thinking, when you look at this quality of life plan, that speaks to people. And I think that, you know, not only having this plan drive that section drive everything else, like that kind of systems thinking, that can be laid over anything. It can be laid over housing, it can be laid over jobs, it can be laid over anything. Whereas when we're looking at reductive kind of planning, it's very difficult for a layperson to understand even what that means. But systems thinking, it speaks to us at our DNA level. So that's where I am with that. So thank you.
All right. So Elizabeth and then Jean, and then if we could have a moment just to touch on some of these items, that would be great.
Well, thanks, Heidi. I really appreciated that framing, followed as like deepening what Kathy was sharing too about what kind of overlays may be able to support real vitality with real intergenerational community health and wealth. Everybody knows I'm into words and their histories, and so I just want to name something that I think gets it down into the, like, making it pretty simple. You know, Heidi said ecology, ecology, ecology. Like, ecology literally means the study of interactions of beings in their home. So it's about a home and relationships of individuals in the home. Economy means home and norms. Like, it's the way that we manage our common home. For intergenerational community rooted health and wealth, I think that's what we're really looking at. And so if we help people who want to be part of the development of intergenerational community rooted health and wealth, our plan can help direct, make it easy for people to know how they can build and develop and contribute in ways that hit key performance indicators. So if a vitality zone has an equity and vitality zone focuses on that kind of intergenerational community rooted health and wealth, there are clear performance indicators of what they need to do, and the burden then becomes on the developer to show that they're doing it. But that's not a burden, that's a real opportunity. Like, the opportunity to be able to actually be rewarded for doing the right thing, when contractually they're only, like, companies are only contractually required for the shareholder return to profits. And there are a lot of people who want to do more. And so being able to make it easy for the people who want to build that way to do so, I think we can find ways to have that more clear in the plan by reframing with the quality of life what we are talking about for success and allowing the other sections to help people find their way to action that builds that. And ecology also means like paying attention, right? And so what is missing right now for me as a West Colfax neighbor, we have observed the impacts of upzoning from the 2006 plan and from Blueprint Denver. And what our Jewish neighbors who were part of framing and encouraging that 2006 plan with more allowance for density, they did so with the understanding that greater density would provide more safer, walkable, bikeable streets and more affordable housing. They, on their Sabbath, they don't drive, they are walking. But what they have found is that it's not safer. There's still like tons of traffic, and the housing forms that were developed are targeted for a particular market of people who have mostly dual income, family, young people without children, not designing for intergenerational families or flexibility long-term for people to be able to be there. And often people are in and out. So I just naming that this plan is a 20-year horizon plan. Climate change is already hitting us really strongly. Like our responsibility is to look for the 20 years and look at help people figure out how they can come into relationship with each other in these neighborhoods in a way that actually heals and creates that intergenerational community rooted wealth and health and wealth instead of just like concentrating it more. Anyway, I want Jean to go, but to be able to make sure we have time to do that mirroring back, is I know Val and Eugene, you're wonderful listeners and really committed to having clear understanding. But I think if we name what the impacts were from the last time and recognize that simply increasing density or fixing density, neither of these are real solutions. Both of these are false solutions. We know that lots and lots of people like fight affordable housing and fight equity by clinging to single family housing and excluding everyone. And like neither of these are solutions. It's going to take a lot of rethinking and those kinds of different forms of ownership. And like one last thing, I think it would be great to be able to lift up more case studies by name of what is awesome and working, and have those in that quality of life section of lifting up the actors who are doing that well. Like we do have examples of co-housing. Chantel Mullings, I don't think I pronounced my neighbor's last name right, but like she and her husband they've developed co-housing. They've created affordable housing in the neighborhood. It's not just locally owned, they're actually neighbors. Like lifting up examples like that, lifting up that we have the co-op at First, and there's cooperative healthcare and there's cooperative food efforts underway, and putting that up front and center of showing how people are organizing around principles of liberty and reciprocity and integrity here and now. I think to signal what's possible, I think that would be very helpful as well. And like the pictures are awesome, and I love seeing familiar faces. I love seeing familiar scenes, and like I would love to see that, like see those labeled with some specificity so that people can get a sense of these aren't stock pictures, but you wouldn't know it. If you looked back at it, you wouldn't know that these are actually real people in the West area. So that little tweak can like give more credit to the amazing planning team that's curated really beautiful place-specific, people-specific images.
All right, thank you. Jean.
Hi. I just mostly, I had put something in the chat, and I just really would like to hear from Eugene and Val about some of these recommendations. I think you'd mentioned that. I am particularly concerned about the maximum building heights map that I'm seeing in Sun Valley. It's all black, which to me is an entitlement. You know, we've got zoning in place. We've just rezoned, you know, this whole West Holden area block. And this to me looks like there's entitlement now for anybody to come in, you know, over the 8 stories. I mean, I think some of it is already zoned to 12 stories, but some of it is 8, some of it is 5. This just gives a blanket. And again, my real concern is the stadium district. So I don't know how we achieve this, because I know that there is there are plans, but even in the stadium district, there is no map that shows the whole area at 12 plus stories. And so who is it then that decides, you know, how this kind of multi-level type of development gets done? Certainly the neighborhood will have no impact because the planning board, I mean, that's the way they've interpreted it in the past. If there's some changes in that, I'd love to know, but I really need to hear about some of these things that I'm really concerned will lock us in to things that we don't necessarily want.
All right, so I can start with that one because it's been brought up in a variety of different comments so far this morning. And so one thing that I want to start with the existing projects, Clark Stadium District and also the Cloverleaf project. Those are the 2 large geography areas that have been mentioned. I would also add in that sort of large geography category, Sun Valley is continuing to be actively redeveloped. And then there is a vision or a plan for Westridge Homes. So that too would be a larger development area. And those are all in real close proximity to one another. So what we, in our process with this plan, have been instructed to do is to not duplicate those efforts, but to refer back to them. And one of the reasons why is one, those are active projects. And so we don't want to end up inadvertently creating conflicts as those are still active projects that aren't yet final. I mean, Sun Valley is pretty of all those large plans, it's the one that's probably the most final, even though it continues to be tweaked as DHA, Denver Housing Authority, continues to develop that area. And so, even before we engaged with you all, almost 3 years ago, the instructions we started with were to reflect or direct readers of the West Plan to where those active projects exist, so that as they change, we will be referring to them so that they can stay living active documents. So for those of you who have expressed some concerns around the lack of specificity with regard to those larger projects, that's one of the reasons why. I'm not saying that is the answer, but that is where we have been instructed as a project team to go to.
I understand that.
Yeah, and so
what I had put in the chat.
But there's a difference. There's a difference in referring to those plans and incorporating those plans and changing those plans to just give a blanket entitlement to the highest common denominator in those plans. And that's what this map does.
Okay.
That's what this map does. You know, the stadium district talked about, oh, we want an average of 4 and 5 story buildings, but we also want the ability for a hotel, you know, which in some instances will be 20 stories. And we understand that. That's what it says in the plan. There is nothing in there that shows a whole map with the whole thing black. And this is what was in the Decatur Federal Station Area Plan, just like this, for the section where the DHA campus was. And that became an entitlement. And that was interpreted by the planning board and the city attorney's office as an entitlement to anybody that wants to come in and do anything at 5 stories. So it's not about somebody saying, oh, well, we already have enough 5-story buildings, maybe we don't need that much. No, it's just a plain entitlement to a developer. And that's my concern, is you have taken it to a whole different level with this map. And I'm really concerned about that.
So, well, before Kathy, you chime in, I want to make sure I'm clear in understanding your comments, Jean, and that is, as it relates to this map, because there's been a lot of references to this map and others, what I'm hearing is what is suggested as a maximum height in this area feels too much. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to do the whole area to the maximum height becomes an entitlement for anybody to come in. So, you know, granted, we may or may not have, but maybe they only planned, 4 buildings possibly. But if somebody wants to come in and do, another 5 or 6, hey, they got the money, they're entitled. So that's my concern is that, there's nobody that's going to monitor how many, and it to me supersedes. That's what my understanding is this will supersede even the stadium district plan. And so that's my concern.
Okay. This plan won't supersede the stadium district plan because of the timing of their existence, but I hear you in what you're saying. So I think we can think about how to better reflect the fact that the stadium district plan is the driver within the West plan. And maybe it is, and I don't mean this to sound the way it's going to come out, but maybe it is something as simple as taking out the height as it's shown and having a clearer reference to where that information could be found.
I agree. Just make it, do those,
Yeah.
things we did before. Because
Yeah.
I really want this to change before the draft goes out, because I don't want to get into an argument with it about the stadium district. This is not the battle that we want to pick right now. We want to, kind of keep in a good space with them as a new owners coming in. So I really, really want to get this addressed before that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a part of what I hope we can do is as we are confirming what we're hearing and also looking for ways to solve, if we can even do that quickly. So thank you for that, Jean, because I think that is something we can do that doesn't really impact this plan or their efforts. It better, I guess what I'm hearing and the hope is true, we do a better job by extracting information from West to do a better job of saying this is where you actually go to get the current.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not overly concerned about, down in the, I mean, it concerns me with the DHA area a little bit, but we do have standards, design guidelines and standards, and, that will have to be followed for anything, any of that land that gets sold, most of which is owned by, it does concern me a little bit now that the DHA campus is now up to 12 plus stories. So we've taken it up even another notch, because at some point, no matter what they say, they're going to develop it beyond what is just there right now. So that concerns me a bit that we've just given them an entitlement there.
One additional item, just for clarity's sake, and I know there will be thoughts around this. So but one thing that is true, while this plan may suggest heights in certain places, it's not an automatic. rezoning. So I know we've talked about upzoning in a few comments that I captured. And I do want to make it clear that any recommendations in the plan as it relates to intensity or development or suggested maximum heights does not, should this plan be adopted, result in zoning changes. So
It doesn't, except that it does signal an
Yeah.
intention that comes
Right,
from a
right,
collective
right.
voice. And if the collective voice signals an intention, the code has a responsibility to meet that collective voice. And if it doesn't actually reflect what the collective voice wants, then we've got a big problem.
And so I hear you, and believe me, when I was in your shoes on my neighborhood plan, I had the same concerns. So I understand the two things, the tension between, as a community member, what documents say and the weight that they can result in, and also our task of trying to interpret and to create some framework for really everyone on the how do I want to say this? The maximum sort of precedent, if you will, that is already been set by Blueprint Denver. We started out this whole process by saying what we get to do is further refine and further interpret what Blueprint Denver has set. So one of the key things that we are trying to do, the project team, in addition to, of course, absolutely, of course, hearing you all, but also then trying to interpret the sort of the maximum outcome, not that we're suggesting it, not that we're calling for it, but to say that this is the not to exceed. Nothing can go beyond this threshold as it's defined in Blueprint Denver. So that it's a tough space to try to tease apart without getting into trying to determine zoning at a parcel by parcel level, which we're not trying to do that.
And I've also heard you say, Eugene, that if it's counter to what Blueprint Denver has, that this plan can also articulate that.
That's right.
So instead, what you're saying is that you've just completely glummed on what Blueprint Denver has and just reinforced it instead of doing exactly that possibility of, well, this is an overzoning of this area, or this height limit isn't what we would recommend in this plan. This plan is recommending a lot lower scale, even though if we keep on saying it's again, as Elizabeth had pointed out, it implies and it infers and it gets interpreted that way. So I am also supporting with what Jean says, that needs to be resolved before we go to public with this plan. We don't want to have this argument of what people are entitled to and what they're not entitled to, because we're just putting what Blueprint Denver has in this plan. We need to also articulate more thoroughly what that identifying means, because it certainly also dovetails with the whole growth strategy and wherever you have it, as well as integrated with the height plan. So it doesn't give us any favors as a neighborhood to have it in there when it's going to be our burden to have to deal with down the road. And it does need to be resolved before we go to print on this thing.
Yeah, I will say on that note, and based off of early feedback from many of you, but particularly from those who live in Villa Park, we did bring down heights in the northern part of the Gulch. We brought down maximum building heights by 3 stories. So we have been adjusting what Blueprint Denver had said could be. And that is an example of where we heard you very clearly. And in the vast majority of the areas north of the Gulch, we, with the exception of the 1/8 of a mile around the stations, once you get to a 1/4 mile and then outside of the station area buffer zones, we brought down those heights. So Blueprint Denver suggests 8 stories blanket across the entire northern part of the Gulch. And there's, you know, we heard from this group that was too much. And so we have, in fact, brought heights down. So I do want to make sure that you all understand that as a part of this
Alex.
process, we have been.
And it's still too much. And I think you're still encouraging a lot of displacement to happen. This plan is doing that. And that needs to be addressed. If that is a concern that was identified, that we have a high vulnerability of displacement, then that needs to be addressed with what we have listed on maximum heights and growth strategies and with Blueprint Denver. Unless
And
we don't
maybe
want,
this,
we want to live in this neighborhood, unless we want to displace people. I mean, if that's the goal, it's doing it.
and maybe like the overlay that Kathy's been speaking of, if an overlay comes first around what quality is required, and there's no automatic entitlement, but there's a automatic understanding of the standards to which development it is intended. Maybe there's a way to be able to dance with that. Like if, like, I don't know, there's Heidi earlier was speaking about the way that it, like, the way that it's framed of like, developer, we'll get to give you this if you do this. Like there's a subtle, but I think significant difference of we need affordable housing in a certain percentage around our transit stations, our BRT stations and the rest. Like how can, like that's the bare minimum. How can we work with you to get, have it pan out for you on a return on investment that includes like the wider range of community capitals, not just the financial capital. So I like I don't know, there's way, but having that lead, having just a like here, like this is what the maximum height allowance is if you're a developer, and that's the first thing you see, like, and a community, that's the first thing you see, then it immediately focuses the attention on that and not the nuanced complexity of what we need.
So another comment I wanted to make sure I heard and clarify was related to order. I will need to go back and just talk this through with the NPI programmatic team. I believe we have the flexibility to change the order of content so that we could, per what you all have expressed at the very start, lead with the ideals around quality of life. And assuming that that is true, we can certainly reorder content. To me, that is one, what you're asking for, and to the points raised this morning, sets a tone by simply the order in which information is outlined. And so I don't know the answer to that at this moment. Like, do we have that authority as this project team? I believe we do. But I don't want to say that with 100% certainty. If there is some programmatic higher level for all of the 19 plans and their framework. So, but I am going to absolutely advocate for that, because I hear what you all are saying and the messages that get sent by the order in which content exists in the plan. So to me, that feels like something that is really of things to do in getting the plan right. I think that is one that makes a lot of sense and certainly resonates with you all, and I don't have any issue with that. In fact, having heard this conversation, and having heard and recalling all of the conversations that we've had in this space around the sort of unspoken message that the plan conveys simply through what we talk about in the order that it's presented in. So I think we can certainly have that conversation and really advocate for that revision.
So Eugene, I know that CDP likes things orderly.
Yes.
And this may seem like an outlier plan then, but 4 out of 6 neighborhoods in this plan are nest neighborhoods. I don't think there's any other plan that will have a concentration of nest neighborhoods like this. So I think, just from that perspective, that's a good rationale as to why this one may need to look different.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you on that. Heidi.
And I just want to just to speak to around the transit, and I know that you look at this opportunity map, and this is all in our corridors, and when we're talking about transit oriented development, that's sort of, I think that's what Denver tries to talk about, but I don't see any transit oriented development. What I see is a lot of transit adjacent development. And I think the difference between those two is really important to make, because density in and of itself doesn't solve what we need and what we want around these corridors. Are where these are very, very important vitality zones, as Elizabeth mentioned, and I love that language, because this is where our resources are. This is where our community can thrive. We live or die in these areas, really, and how they're managed. And what I see in the opportunity areas on the map on page 33 is really, it's transit adjacent. And if we're going to have this kind of a plan, it needs to really be integrated, and again around systems, and again around ecology and people, but really around transit oriented, not just adjacent.
There was something else that you all have. Oh, overlays. I wanted to talk and speak to that too. So one of the things that this plan, in any neighborhood plan, it's not just West, there are tools and ideas and concepts that you all have, like the overlays as a potential solution. And I think you all know this, but I just wanted to state it so that it's clear out there and we're all on the same understanding of this. We can certainly talk about, a variety of different types of tools that we think will help encourage the outcomes that have been desired and expressed. So an overlay, the plan won't create overlays. I want to be real clear about that as well. But it makes the suggestion that be a tool that then gets developed as an implementation step of the plan. So a great example of that is sort of underway right now. And there's an overlay that was suggested by the community in Northwest Denver, specifically in the Sunnyside neighborhood. And the idea of an overlay to help with design quality, for example, that's one of the elements that overlay is attempting to achieve. And so the idea of an overlay then turned into a project to create the overlay. So I know that's a small little nuance, but I just wanted to make sure to state that very clearly, that we can talk about overlays as solutions and other types of solutions to other content areas within the plan, but the plan in and of itself won't result in those things existing. So I just wanted to be super clear about that. And that, though, what it does do is it does set up the identified need so that we in planning services can say, okay, in our 2023 work plan, we really want to, as an effort to implement West, we want to take on this project of understanding and further defining what that overlay is that this plan is calling for, as an example of what a next step would be in the plan implementation. So just wanted to be super clear about that as well.
Could that have I think I know what overlay you're talking about in Sunnyside. Is that the one that Catherine Cornwell's been pushing? Because that's been languishing a little bit, and the process I think is in questionable, maybe, I don't know, but I think that there needs to be really solid language and resources if that's a suggestion, was what I would say, so that we're working together to actually do it.
Yeah, and what part of how our work plan comes about, for those who may not be familiar, we often look to plans and the key things that we feel we want to pick up on in advance. A council person, whoever it might be, can be the champion of an idea coming out of a planning effort. Other agencies can also say, hey, for example, with a lot of the mobility recommendations, because we've received feedback about how detailed some of them are as it relates to other types of recommendations. And that's in part because one, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, they helped draft that section, and they did so with projects in mind. So they're like, we really want to address these high injury networks. We really want to address these unsafe intersections. So let's get in the plan some specific locations so that they can then point to it and begin implementation of those solutions. So it doesn't, and I say all of that just to say that it's the implementation of our plans as we look more to make that more meaningful and something that we don't have to wait as long as we have had to wait in the past, because there are very clear identifiable action items. Is what we're trying to move towards. And it came up also, and I just wanted to touch on it briefly, and then I think Jean, you have your hand up. As far as metrics go, and I think Eric brought this up, and I really, that comment really was helpful and resonated as far as some clearer targets, and not just higher level language. So I think that's a great example of an idea, along with leading with ecology and really kind of thinking those kinds of ideas through. And performance-based zoning, which is something that we've been talking more about internally, because we have an MPI implementation team that is being put together to help us execute on these plans so that we're not spending 2 or 3 years creating them and then just waiting, but that the next iteration is there's a team within the city led by planning services to some degree that then picks out these high level priority projects to start working on them. So we're trying to create this sort of flow, this workflow. So, but it all begins with a plan most of the time, and then followed immediately by what from this can we begin implementing, and do it with partners within the city as well as externally. So we live and breathe this, and we have these conversations all the time, but that doesn't mean that it filters through to you all. So I did want to spend the last couple of minutes really explaining the direction that we're heading in as a city, as far as really truly getting things done. So I wanted just to put that out there as well. And I say that because there could be overlays that come out of this as a recommendation. I'll pick on the ecology overlay, then for us to take that, incorporate it into our work program to figure out how to create it, craft it as an implementation tool, is the kind of sort of systematic steps through this process that we really have a lot of energy behind. Jean, did you have your?
Yeah, and I think you've been touching all of this, I mean, in different kinds of ways, but I just wanted to hear like a statement about business and industry specifically. I know we've talked about it a little bit before, but how does all of these ecology and all of this overlay, how can we strengthen this section on business and industry to really show some responsibility for the business and industrial community to be part of this solution, as opposed to right now, they think, oh, I've been in Sun Valley for 30 years, it's south of 8th Avenue, none of this applies to me. None of them turn out, for these meetings because they don't really think it applies to them. Sometimes they're out of state owned, so they're not even tied into the local. What's going on locally. So that just to me all speaks to how there is this disconnect, whether it's local jobs, whether it's their contribution, to the community, whether it's just even trying to do as much as they can to become greener, for this health and safety, of the surrounding community. I just don't see, I just see a huge disconnect. And I understand that the city, you told me the whole thing with Jeff Romine, but you also told me you taught a class on this. So I know that what are those examples, that can really be used to illustrate, incentives for B corporations as opposed to, just whatever. What are those kinds of things that can really be put in this plan to not just encourage, but to really, kind of embed a sense of responsibility on their part to come to the table once in a while?
Eugene, you're on mute.
Oh, man. No, I thought maybe I could get through it without that. Thank you for that, Mo. And so I was saying, I would like to respond to Jean's question, and Eric, I recognize your hand is up. So let me respond to Jean and then take your question, Eric. I do think that we have some opportunities to look at ways to strengthen that sort of industrial language in the jobs and economy section. And you're right, I have had classes explore what innovation might mean or looks like around the world, but around the United States. Are there ways to leverage industrial manufacturing areas for food production, for example? So bringing in cleaner, healthier activities within the footprint of an industrial area that then becomes a benefit to its surrounding community. And Elizabeth, I think one of your examples featured that. And I immediately sent it to Val and was like, Val, read this article and let's figure out how to get something like this in there. So we are definitely acting on the feedback that you all have been providing to us. But I did want to bring up, because someone, I'm not sure who it was, but brought this up earlier, representing sort of that industrial transition area. And really what we mean by that, and if it's not coming through, then that is telling me something. But we are wanting this document and with those industrial transition zones to be really truly that, not have two separate islands where residential is on one side of the street and then on the other is the sort of historic industry, but really look for ways where we can have more of a mix of housing, worker type spaces, maker spaces, so that as the areas between purely residential and purely manufacturing begin to blend, that we are blending them with a variety of different uses and building forms, and really try to better integrate where those hard lines exist today to make them better blended with a whole variety of different ways that space could be used. It could be artist spaces, you name it. So that is what that is intending to do when we talk about that transition zone. And I think, Kathy, you were talking about it as a missed opportunity. And I wanted to reflect back that the way that we are thinking about those areas around the city, so not specific to West, is really trying to encourage more of that blending mixture. So I wanted to just take a second and revisit that as well.
And that really could be a transformative project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Eric, you had your hand up and I wanted to make sure to recognize you.
Oh, no, sorry. That was my hand slipped. I'm fine.
Oh, okay. So we have about 15, 20-ish minutes left. And I wanted to make sure that I sort of, again, recap some of the easier to respond to comments, and some mapping changes to do perhaps a better job of referring back to those active plans and not inadvertently signaling something that we don't intend to through just the visual content. So I think that is something I'm more than happy to go back and work with. Talking about the order. So again, I think that is something that we can work with and really look at how we order the content to send the signals that are important to you all as community representatives and what this plan really wants to lead with. Looking at ways to maybe get into more specificity around certain tools. So overlays, and maybe we could even have some sort of inset section that speaks to overlays as types of tools, not to be an exhaustive list, not to suggest these are the only ones you get, but as examples of what they could attempt to achieve as outcomes. And I think we have an opportunity where we can speak more into examples of what we mean in these transition zones for manufacturing and how to hold up ideas that are taking place around the country for 21st century manufacturing that is more community connected and focused. And so I think we can certainly do that. And there was one other sort of higher level, and I know the photos and, identifying photos and places, that too is in the easier to achieve. That's time on our part, and metrics. And where we can identify the types of metrics or the types of, like the AMI that Eric brought up earlier, I do think that we can certainly demonstrate what you mean by affordability through having some of those figures that are familiar in the world of development. So it does a stronger job of communicating. When we say affordable in West, this is the range or the price points that we're referring to. So those are some of the big ones that I wanted to make sure to kind of overview and capture. And then the River Sisters, I think, kind of falls into that thinking of how to lead and how to set a tone through an example, which we took a go at it, but maybe we can look for more ways within each of the sections to do that. And then one last thing, and then I will stop talking and see if there's more or other comments before we wrap up in the next few minutes here. One of the structural things that, and Adriana, I will let you hop in here. One of the structural things that we have been asked to do with NPI plans, we as a team, not just West, but all of the 3 active NPI planning teams have been asked by a whole host of people to write less, make our plans shorter. So we're having an internal conversation around what does that mean and what does it look like? So I don't have anything to share on that other than to say that that is another one of those tensions that we're trying to balance. And one of the ways that we have attempted to strike that balance currently with West and with the 2 plans that are underway is to minimize duplication. And so one of the things that we've tried to do with West is where recommendations really apply broadly and apply everywhere, you'll see those recommendations in sort of the earlier sections of the plan, because they are really meant to be recommendations to apply across all 6 neighborhoods. So looking for opportunities for more affordability, the connectivity that is spoken to pretty broadly in the mobility section, for example. So we've got these ideas and thinking apply everywhere. And then for neighborhoods, if there's something additional that isn't make all the intersections safer and more pedestrian friendly and green streets when we are looking at infrastructure improvements, if there's anything that is a little bit more unique or nuanced for a particular neighborhood, we try to speak to that nuance in the neighborhood chapters with the assumption that sidewalks, big picture, need to be addressed everywhere. So you'll find that content, you know, in the big section, if you will. But if there are specific corridors or focus areas that really, when the city is looking at sidewalk improvements, and Valverde really wants the first priority areas to be X street, that's when we would call out X street in the Valverde section. But sidewalks in general, we recognize and are trying to reflect earlier on. So that's a part of the structural balance that we have been tasked with working to achieve. And I know that came up earlier in our conversation today about you have it here, but it's not showing up in the neighborhood section. Those are some of the reasons why. So if you see something earlier in the plan, but you don't see it again in the neighborhood section, it's because we're trying to strike that balance. So, Adriana, we haven't heard your voice today, so I want to let you speak, and then we can get back to Heidi, I think is next.
Thanks, Eugene. My question is, there was an announcement last week about the $350 million of federal funding going towards the plat improvements. And I'm curious if anyone on this call knows if Valverde is included in that, and if not, if the reasoning may have been because of the West Area plan going into effect at some point.
Well, one thing I can say very quickly about the river, and others might know more than I do, but when having our conversations with Parks and Rec, they asked us to not get overly specific with the river corridor, with where it touches Sun Valley and Valverde. And now I know why. It's because they were looking at the river as a whole, and I believe pursuing this funding. I think we got really fortunate that the city did win that funding. But my understanding is that the Army Corps of Engineers and the city and others will be looking at the full extent of the South Platte River, including where it runs through Sun Valley and Valverde, for a real true river corridor network improvements. Of course, Sun Valley and Valverde will be a part of that, but Parks and Rec, they were pretty clear that they did not want another process to interfere with their larger, broader systems-wide thinking. So.
Okay, thank you, Eugene, so much. And then just one more question. I know there's been a lot of community input in terms of this group and the steering committee for the West Area Plan for quite some time. And as part of that, I hear a lot of sentiments about what we all would like the future of our neighborhoods to look like. And so I'm just curious if this group, and I can send a meeting if folks are interested after this call, if anyone would be interested in maybe doing kind of like a collective letter of what we like writing it from the future as if all of these things have gone into effect, and what that would look like for future generations in our neighborhoods. And maybe, Eugene, if we knock it out of the park, you all could consider it as an extra letter in the plan. It's just an idea.
I love that idea, and if you all are wanting to produce something like that, I think it's a fantastic way of introducing the overall vision for the West. That could be a great way to introduce the plan. And then, I don't know, Adriana, when you joined us, but we've had some really strong conversations and really thoughtful conversations around the tenor or the tone to set. And by moving some elements around and really highlighting and focusing in on the desires around quality of life and how that could be manifest, and then follow with some of the other more technical content sections, but to really truly speak to all of your aspirations around what kind of place can this be, and doing so through the framework of, you know, the land, the earth, the water, health, regeneration, and if there is this letter that sees that that future and can realize and help everyone else kind of embrace what that vision is, those kinds of things can be extremely powerful and a great way of introducing this community's vision for itself. So I love it. If that's something that you all would want to contribute.
Thank you so much.
So Mo and then Heidi.
Thanks, Eugene. And I love that idea, Adriana. That sounds really creative, and what a positive way to kick off the plan or end it. I know I may sound like a broken record, but I just think so much about I-25, and maybe it's because we're immediately adjacent to it in Valverde. I wonder if maybe this is a missed opportunity to call out I-25 a little bit more in the mobility section. I realize we break down different street types, but when we talk about our trails, even the Platte Trail, right? People riding their bike, racing through, not being aware of the communities that they actually travel through. I think the same for commuters on I-25. And so the crashes that happen on I-25 and the traffic that passes down I-25 all has a direct impact on our neighborhood. And so we have these great conversations about how within this plan, we want to, benefit the environment and try to reverse our impacts. And the city seems to be on board with that. CDOT is, a much different entity and agency. I-25 is so significantly different than any other roadway that enters our neighborhoods. And so I just wonder, it's mentioned a few places, and I think the PEL study is also mentioned in one place, it very much in passing. I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about I-25. I know we're trying to shorten the plan, so maybe this is not the place for it. I'm wondering if other neighborhoods that have had plans immediately adjacent to I-70 have probably talked about I-70, I imagine, although I'm not as familiar. Even like highlighting the crashes in the crash map. And then just, I think about what we might need as a tool again to advocate with CDOT. And when we showed up at the PEL study, Jean, I think you were there, it seemed like the neighborhood voice was maybe a little drowned out. And I don't feel like we were very heard. And I have yet to look at the full report for the study, but from, it really was, the scale seemed to be tipped in terms of the neighborhood voice and the outcome of those meetings. So I just wanted to mention that, and we'll pass it along to Heidi.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that it kind of ties into a couple things that were just said that I just want to mention. On the map on page 152, where it shows the water basins and it's the environmental quality and climate resiliency recommendations. Just the concept of the parks and recreation. It would seem that they don't maybe trust the neighborhood to understand the connection to the river, and that, it just seems a little odd that like this plan would be completely congruent with what's going on in the Platte and everything that comes into it. So I think that if it's been put aside, that it needs to be maybe reintroduced, that we would have something to say about that, and that it would be in line with what Parks and Rec, and that really speaks to kind of even what Mo just was commenting on with CDOT, and that this systems thinking needs to inform those bigger things, that those things don't get to just come in and say, well, Colfax is a highway, and that's how we're going to do it, and you guys can take your cute little overlay, and we don't, that's not part of us. And there's threads of that through it. So I think that the more we can incorporate that, and the more we can emphasize working around our water quality and our water basins, and then having that inform our mobility and the highways and all of that, and making sure that it does hold all the pieces accountable, no matter where, like what department or what level. And even Dottie, to some extent, they're not, when we're in meetings and we're talking about things about water and wastewater that's now underneath them, I don't get the sense that they're being informed by this kind of thinking, and I would want to be able to go to a meeting and refer to this and have people be like, yes, that is correct. This is the map, and that we have a voice with that.
So let me just reflect that piece back to you. Because I hear what I want to just confirm what I'm hearing. So, and I have a question. In the whole thinking about the rephrasing and highlighting the quality of life aspects and leading with that, which I think we can certainly do, and thinking about having development be informed by natural systems, it would make sense to me. With you pointed out or brought us to page 152. So my question is there something inaccurate about this, or is it just a matter of, was it you showing it as an example? I want to clarify that.
Yeah, like it's like my favorite map on here. I think that because it includes all the things that we've been kind of trying to emphasize in a way that I think that I'm talking about with this, and that I think we may be trying to talk about with our water quality basins, with the green amenity streets, and I'd want to even see this be like more, and identifying tree canopies along the areas where there are heat islands and lack of trees. Like this to me, like, speaks to what we're talking about as a base, more than, these other maps are informative, and certainly the maps in the front don't. I mean, if you didn't know, you wouldn't know that page 52 and page 150, or page 33 and page 152 were even of the same place. So yes, thanks.
Yeah, and I think the order that Kathy named in the beginning too is helpful to think. If we're naming quality of life, and then we're naming how we move around connections. Quality of life talks a lot about green infrastructure and regenerative infrastructure, and a lot of the infrastructure is going to be needed for 20 years for us not to be horribly affected by the disruptions that are on the horizon. So but we also know that often green infrastructure and mobility investments, if they aren't incorporated into a much larger holistic planning project, they result in displacement, because we all want to live in the high quality areas. And so if you make it nice and you don't design in for housing, so that was the third section she named, but having an arc that tells that story around that, I think, is really helpful. And then having the final chapter to be how developers can work with the land to be heroes in the story. Like, I mean, there are many types of developers, and we want developers that are developing vitality, developing equity on a large scale, and want to show how to make it easy for them to be part of that beautiful vision, but naming like the predictable stuff that, like what's possible, but also what we need to be thinking of. I think it restructures, tells a better story. And I love what Adriana suggested about what the overarching arch bit, like it's a concise story that people can find their place within. And I will also say around stories, if we can hold the story line, we can handle the complexity a lot better. One of the reasons stories are important for systems change is that we can get lost in the details. And so for ways to streamline the overall plan and make it more legible, if we start with a clear overarching storyline, the parts are gonna fall into more natural relationship. And so you don't have to have each part reference every other part consistently, which I understand, like you've been dealing with writing, given a reductive structure, and you are systems thinkers, so you're trying to make the connections that aren't there. But maybe a way to simplify it is to make the storyline so clear up front that they fit into that bigger whole more easily.
Yeah, that's
Here, Elizabeth.
I was just gonna say that's a really good way to rethink the framework for that. And I do think, Elizabeth, that as we've started to have these conversations, as we've got 2 new plans just starting, and hearing the feedback from our own internal teams, those who use our plans as well, not just within CPD, Community Planning and Development, but throughout the entire city. And some of those voices are like, less, more, less. We want to be able to pick it up and know what you want us to do with this. And so, but I think you're onto something with what you just shared and how we could create that vision in the story, and then the details just sort of follow, but that the framework of the vision can be better sort of encapsulated and conveyed up front. I'm gonna hold on to that. We are at 12, and I know some folks have got to scram, but any last thoughts? I see Mo and Kathy, I know you were just, I think, going to say something as well. Or someone was, I don't know who it was.
I was just supporting what Elizabeth had just outlined. That arc is really important in creating this plan.
Okay, thank you.
One comment that I might want to, that I will put in the plan, but also wanted to address is Elizabeth is talking about maybe a concluding section about developers and their role. I also think about when we describe involuntary displacement, I think it's described in the plan, and maybe something that we also forget are those seemingly predatory home buying companies.
Yep.
And how it may seem voluntary, but really maybe a family would stick around, or some of our efforts would allow them to stay in place. And they're not aware of how quickly what they're being compensated can go, go once they have that money. And so that was just another kind of, what would you say, influence that I don't know, again, if it's appropriate to call it out in the plan, but I do think about a lot because I get those notifications. And I think there are a number of families that have given into those types of businesses. And maybe it is to their benefit, but I also know there are other intentions, I think, as well to be aware of. So that's it. And I just wanted to give that context. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
I love that, Mo, and I just want to name that there's one, I think it was in quality of life section. I'm trying to find the page of it, but Val might know it integrally, but there's a table that I think is from the Colfax interchange that includes a very specific thing about locally owned affordable housing. And it was very simple, but very clear to be not the predatory zonings or predatory developer sort of thing that's very common. And if we can build some key performance indicators in around local ownership being supported or incentivized or prioritized, I think that would be really helpful. And I'm glad that there is a precedent for it and a very pretty table in our plan. Even if I can't find it and it easily gets lost.
Well, Sean, you've been with us, and Jaime and all of you. Are there any sort of closing thoughts as we take this information and kind of look for opportunities to address your feedback?
I got nothing. I like the conversation though.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you all. This has been great.
Yeah, nothing at this point really, just when this is ready, just knowing how to navigate the people that need to see this, not the people that'll be looking at it like in the future, but just kind of like especially where there's big change, being able to know how to speak to, like to navigate through like the Villa Park sections, the FMAR, the growth, the food, the mobility, just kind of like a better, like, I know you have a section, how to use this, I don't think that's intended for how to read this if you're interested in the changes that are coming. So I just wanted to bring that point out. It's not for right now, but just something to kind of keep in the future as this rolls out, just kind of like help guide us to talk about it. Thank you.
And I think for me, I would really like to sort of see what the outline of next steps would be. And I'm kind of assuming that what you're saying, Eugene, is that you're going to go back to CPD, relaying our information that we've discussed this morning, and that the plan will not be published until we have another conversation about how that reordering, if it's possible to do, fits in, and have a response in some of the items that we've already talked about as our next steps to see kind of how it builds the bridge to where we want to go.
Yeah. Again, recognizing we have all sorts of internal crud to balance, and we're getting a pretty strong directive to move things along. What I will do, and what is the most immediate next step, is to relay this feedback back to the larger team and our managers, get a sense of what we think, me and Val and Becca, who was not available this morning, how we might go about implementing some of these requests, reordering, restructuring, and kind of addressing that higher level where things are and the tone that it sets, and just understanding between this and all of our other work, when we think we can actually get these revisions made in an effort to get ready to go out to the public. Yeah, that is the next immediate step. I have been asked on a regular basis, when are we going to go forward? And I've been very clear that I did not want to communicate any kind of deliverable that would be public facing until we had this meeting this morning. Because I didn't know if you would love the plan, hate the plan, or what the deal was. And so I can't answer, but could not answer my management on when this would be ready for the public until we had this conversation. The good news is no one said that they absolutely hated everything. So I don't feel like we have to start from scratch. I do think we have a big responsibility of rethinking the tone that the plan is setting, and how we can make modifications to better reflect the tone that's important to these 6 neighborhoods. And I think that is achievable, but I need to check in with Valerie and her schedule and mine and yada yada. So that is the next step. And then once I have a sense of what we can accomplish and in what time frame, I can come back to you all and communicate that. And I have to ask you all to recognize and understand that we too have to get this out the door. If it had not been for COVID, this plan should have been finished at the end of 2021.
Yeah. So, but also just to name, if you need support, if you need some political pressure to be placed on others to expand that time frame, that's also possible. The fact is that COVID happened and life is not the same.
Yeah.
COVID happened, and we've had conversations as a city and as a nation that have not happened and been open to have for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Paradigm shift conversations, the bigger stories and underlying mental models, you couldn't really talk like that because people weren't feeling the collective pain, and it was mostly marginalized people who were forced to experience the burden of a system that is not set up for vitality. And so we can work on that. And I just want to be really explicit about what the current tone is. The story isn't there. The quality of life is the first time that there's an acknowledgement beyond past harm, where there's a clear focus on healing. And the first session is so business as usual, and it makes it look like the only thing we have to manage, the only thing that we have to figure out how to handle is new investment coming in and where it should go based on business as usual. And oh, there are all these people who want to develop. Well, how should we manage new speculative development? And then we talk about, yeah, speculative development can cause displacement issues. So then we talk about the affordable housing crunch around it. But like pandemic and climate chaos, like we've got to plan everything around that and pivot. And so the gift of COVID, if there is a gift, is that there's been some more space to do some more fundamental rethinking and adjust our timelines and priorities so that we're not just planning on a 5-year rate of return for profit for a developer forecast and really thinking about how can we build in a 20-year horizon with intentional adaptation and performance metrics along the way.
Yeah,
And if
at a
you
time
need-
like that, builds for eternity.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for giving us 2 hours of your time, plus all the hours you put in preparation for today. So believe me, none of that has been lost on us, and we just are very grateful for you. So thank you.
We appreciate you.
So hear from you more.
More to come.
More to
Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you all. I have to run.
Okay. Thank you.